All that teamwork, of course, means nothing if you're not able to convert yourself in the feature match area all out on your lonesome. And we're going to get a chance to head back to our feature match area right now. We're heading down for round 5 here of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. The format very much still standard, and these players ready and raring to go. Let's head back down to our feature match area for a little bit more magic. Hello and welcome to this round 5 here at Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. We are very truly into the standard rounds now, and we're going to get a chance to see one of the fan favorites in the tournament, Reid Duke. No gigantic surprises for me in terms of what sort of deck he's been playing. He's the kind of person that has a relatively strong guild allegiance, that being Golgari. He loves green-black value, and this is a format where there's plenty of opportunity to leverage that. Here he will find himself up against, well, the greatest player that Luxembourg has ever seen, that being Steve Hatto. Luxembourg, small enough that if you've got a small globe, you probably could cover the entire country with your finger, but you know what? Steve Hatto, a very, very potent competitor. We see him a lot on the GPs and indeed on the Pro Tour, and he's facing down against Reid Duke with some very well-worn Lamoire Elves there. Signed by Mark Tadine. He's got the Forest from back in the early days of when he was playing, and up against Mono Red.
Yeah, here you already see that trade. Fanatical Firebrand trading with Llanowar Elves, and we're going to see probably a redux of that. Take 2, the return of Fanatical Firebrand, killer of Llanowar Elves.
Yeah, I mean, killing these mana creatures at the first opportunity, really important. They can very much let these Golgari decks get a big start on you.
Yeah, it's essentially... actually, that's an interesting line from Steve. Deciding to leave the Llanowar Elf here... and keeping up a lightning strike, trying to maybe nab a key creature from Reid, say a Jade Light Ranger, or, you know, Jade Light Ranger being really what you're expecting. Maybe Steve also going, there's not many key 4-drops in the Golgari deck. The worst thing that could happen is something like Vraska Golgari Queen, but very few lists play that card. And even if they do, it's a 1 or 2 of. So Steve decided, you know what, I don't really need to kill this Llanowar Elf here, and I can take my time. And I'd rather Lightning Strike an on-curve J-Light Ranger to clear the way for this Legion War Boss. So I really like this take by Steve here. Not trading that Firebrand for the Llanowar Elves, and rather using that Lightning Strike, clearing the way for a upcoming Legion War Boss.
A little bit of extra information in terms of how Reid navigated those Explorers. Ended up putting a couple of cards in the graveyard here as Lightning Strike deals with the Jade Light Ranger. And here's the follow-up on turn 3 for Steve Hatto. He's got Legion Warboss. He's got a nice clear board to attack into. And that means that he's definitely going to be able to get some advantage. That 1 green mana available from Reid Duke, unlikely to deal with a Goblin token that attacks him with haste there.
Yeah, the biggest risk with this line is that Reid has access to 5 mana. On this turn, which could mean a Vivian Reid. But between the Legion War Boss, a Vivian Reid would be very easy to kill. So Steve is not really worried about that. And with Reid not having a second Black Source to stop this onslaught, I think Steve is going to be able to push ahead for damage. Yeah,
this is one of the things that Mono Red has been doing basically since its inception in the history of the game, punishing any kind of a stumble that it sees from an opponent. And right now, Steve Hatto, everything in his hand completely live to get cast here, whereas Reid Duke sat on 3 different spells that require double black, and right now, the only permanent he has in play that can do anything to stop what Steve has going on is a lone Lamoire Elves, which if it has to resort to blocking, it's really not living its true purpose.
No, I mean it is if you're winning the game from there. But yeah, Llanowar Elf is designed to make mana, not sacrifice itself to the army of goblins. But Reid decided, you know what, that's going to be a lot of ongoing damage, and I need to deal with this problem now.
Yeah, Mentor putting a +1/+1 counter on one of those tokens, the other one trading with Lamoire Elves. And Steve here, he's got mana, he's going to get to follow up, and looks like it's going to be Runaway Steamkin, a card that in future turns could potentially lead to some very, very explosive turns from him. A lot of cards can get played in one turn once that Steamkin starts charging up.
Yeah, and while that Fanatical Firebrand could have gone into combat here, Steve preferring to keep it back for its ability rather than, say, attacking with it and putting counter on it, making sure it doesn't trade for Llanowar Elf.
Wildgrowth Walker, in principle, one of the best cards against these mono-red lists, but with no follow-up Explore for Reid Duke, it's going to be a tough one for him to get past Steve Hatto here, who gets down Still more creatures. Charges up his... charges up that Steamkin there and charges into the red zone.
Yeah, and with the Wizard's Lightning there, just so much tempo, so much damage.
Vaishino Pyromancer, it is a wizard. That means that Wizard's Lightning, a straight-up lightning bolt, clears a path. Gigantic swings here for Hatto. And Reid Duke, well, he needs everything, and I'm not sure that he's going to be able to find any of it.
Yeah, essentially the only card that could save Reid from a spot like this, if Steve did not have more Lethal Burn in hand, is something like Find Finality. But 6 mana, we're at least 2 mana off, and with Steve basically, this game decided to leverage Legion Warboss, clearing the board, making sure that those goblins added up, and when the red deck gets board presence, that's a very bad sign for the opposition.
Steve Hatto, he had a good run in draft. He was on Boros, so being aggressive there, being aggressive now with mono red in standard. And Reid Duke is going to have to try and find a way of getting 2 wins on the bounce if he's going to escape this round with the victory. We will find out exactly how that goes for him very shortly. Do not go anywhere. There'll be more magic after these messages.
Countdown, tick, tick, tock. About time we set things up.
Hello and welcome back to this, our round 5 match here at Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. There you can see our feature match area as these players work their way to navigate through standard, and we're going to get a chance to jump back into our match between Reid Duke and Steve Hatto. Duke on his green-black list, Golgari all of the way for him wherever it's possible in a whole bunch of different formats, but certainly this standard format, it's a very reasonable choice. In game 1, though, he wasn't quite able to get the mana draws that he was looking for against Steve Hatto. Steve's mono-red deck punishingly consistent in what it was doing, killed off a few key mana creatures, but ultimately it was the lack of double black that really left Reid out in the cold for game 1, but looks like he's got a hand that he can keep here in game 2. No early mana accelerant, but I don't know that's necessarily the end of the world against this red deck.
Yeah, it's not usually a problem to take your time here. What really matters is a card like Wildgrowth Walker with Explore Creatures. Free life, incidentally, is such a huge edge against these aggressive red decks. They do go a little bigger post board, usually with a card like Rekindling Phoenix, but this Wildgrowth Walker staying in play would be quite advantageous for Reid, especially followed up by the dream start of Jade Light Ranger. But yeah, Lava Coil, we've seen it deal. I haven't seen Wildgrowth Walker not die to Lava Coil yet.
Yeah, Lava Coil, in principle, in these red decks, has the possibility of not being very powerful, given that it can't go to the head. There are lots of other burn spells available, but consistently killing a Wildgrowth Walker pretty important. And Merfolk Branch Walker there coming down, getting the Explore of a non-land card, that meaning big enough to block, but not big enough to not be shocked. And Steve Hatto continuing to get into the red zones here, doing what the red decks always do, which is assaulting that life total.
Yeah, Reid showing the power of these Branch Walkers to not miss another land drop. Essentially, these Branch Walkers and these J-Light Rangers are the cards that the Golgari deck needs to essentially be able to say, okay, this is how I want to draw, what I want to draw. Do I want lands? Do I want spells? And having that choice. For example, that Ritual of Suit, a powerful spell potentially against the red deck. But when Reid goes, I don't need that now. What I need is lands. Hits the Branch Walker the next turn after missing a land draw and gets it, so to not fall too much behind. Although this is the aggressive draw from Steve. And with that Firebrand and Runaway Steamkin, that might be a lot of damage coming in.
Yeah, I'm interested in the Deathgorge Scavenger that's been brought in from the sideboard here, because on the face of things, that looks like a card that's good against graveyards. But it's also a body that does have, as we mentioned before, some incidental life gain, and that life gain might mean that Reid is going to be able to transition from the mid to the late game here. But the one thing he's desperately trying to find, it feels like it's been a consistent story throughout this match, is the lands that he needs to cast his spells.
Yeah, here, that Overgrown Tomb is really nice. Reid probably could go for Deathgorge Scavenger here to gain 2 life, knowing that it's unlikely that Steve has access to more shocks. But yeah, I think this is a better line. Having access to Vraska's Contempt to deal with Runaway Steamkin, making sure to stop the bleeding and then get a Doom Whisperer down as soon as the red light gets drawn.
Yeah, Doom Whisperer could be a bit of a problem for this mono-red list. It's just such a gigantic creature that it's going to require multiple cards from Steve Hatto in order to be able to deal with it. 6/6 flying trample for 6 mana. Yes, there's that extra ability, but sometimes it'll just be a matter of it can just survive so much. And we see Vraska's Contempt here in response to that Goblin Chain Whirler, that meaning that there was never going to be a moment where there could be 3 counters on the Steamkin.
Yeah, and in here, Reid responding to the Runaway Steamkin with Vraska's Contempt, making sure there's not free counters so that Steve would have access to mana.
Technically the Steamkin in exile, though I don't think it's going to matter too much in this particular matchup. These red decks, they don't get too much back from their graveyards.
No, it can matter for something like Reid's Deathgorge Scavenger, but it's very unlikely that all the creatures would be gone. I'm sure they'll get fixed at some point. There we go.
Firebrand for 2 life.
So yeah, Deathgorge Scavenger eating that Fanatical Firebrand.
Up to 11. Go.
And Reid Duke here, he may have hit a point of some stabilization, able to get a couple of creatures on the battlefield to be able to block with, gain a little bit of life with Deathgorge Scavenger with the potential to do so again.
Yes.
There we go.
Just fix that exile bit there.
Yeah, so that was Vraska's Contempt on Runaway Steamkin. The card would have been exiled. And here, Reid, instead of going for Doom Whisperer, decided to go for 2 creatures here. The idea, this is stabilization. Reid is just looking to stabilize the board until either Doom Whisperer or Vraska Relic Seeker can come on the board and wreak havoc. Vraska Relic Seeker can kill this Goblin Chain Whirler with another land, but yeah. This is Steve Hatto's push here, using that Fight with Fire, attacking Invoke creatures. We'll likely see Reid just trade off this Branch Walker, going down to 8, and now untap and try to take over the game.
Yeah, Steve has run out of resources here. He's working off the top of his deck, and while these red decks do have the potential to do some pretty cool stuff with Experimental Frenzy, this is the point where Reid Duke, in principle, needs to turn a corner, try and make sure that there's not going to be too much damage coming in each and every turn, and leverage the power of his just bigger, more expensive spells.
Yeah, and here Reid decided to go for Doom Whisperer, deciding to deploy a board presence before the Planeswalker, essentially Doom Whisperer protecting the future of Vraska Relic Seeker. And if Steve will have to draw quite a powerful card. Even though life totals are in Steve's favor, I would say that Reid has the advantage here, both with Steve having drawn a land this turn, and probably some of these Lightning Strikes and Wizard's Lightning will have been shaved from the deck, meaning it's harder to burn Reid from 8. And Reid is going to most likely play down this Vraska's Relic Seeker, kill the Goblin Chain Whirler, or make a Pirate and take over the game.
Here is Vraska. So much loyalty on the big Planeswalker there, ticking up to create a 2/2 token with Menace.
Yeah. Here making the token to make sure Vraska can't die to, again, one of those cards like Wizard's Lightning. And essentially, Steve has no reason to attack Vraska Relic Seeker since it has the same loyalty as Reid's life total. But Steve deploying the lands here. There is a possibility that Steve boarded in Banefire. Not normally a card against these black-red deck. These Golgari decks. But I've seen players do very strange things sometimes, and Banefire here would be quite the card.
I mean, I think that he does have Fight with Fire as well, and that's another reason to potentially get up to this higher mana total. Reid getting his first hits in, I think, of the match, in fact. Finally getting some damage on the other side of things.
I guess Reid technically gave himself a hit with that Overgrown Tomb. But here, with the 2 Doom Whisperers, the Vraska about to go to -10 to put Steve Hatto down to 1, I don't really see a card that Steve can draw here, and that's it.
All right, Reid Duke squaring things up. The 3 next to his name indicating that right now he's the 3rd ranked player in the world and very much looking to put together a good performance here. Start off his Pro Tour well, not just for himself, but for his entire team. Team Ultimate Guard, currently the reigning Team Series champions. And those guys, they live for the competition, very, very keen to make sure that they can defend that title.
Yeah, and sticking together again for this here, and a really dominant force on the Pro Tour over the years.
We're going to get a chance to have a little bit of a look in on one of our other tables here. We're going to jump over to the back table. So this is Petr Sahurek, and he's up against Panagiotis Papadopoulos. So we got a little bit more mono red on the right-hand side of our screen here for Papadopoulos. And for Sahurek, he is also on Golgari midrange. So a matchup we're familiar with, even if the players have changed around a little bit. And the life totals, once again, as one might expect, kind of favoring the red deck in the early stages. But this time around, there's a Wild Growth Walker in play that already has 3 counters on it. There's also a Death Gorge Scavenger. So Sahurek, he has the tools to potentially gain back a lot of life here.
Yeah, here, what Sahurek really wants is to draw a Finality, the perfect card for this board state.
Yeah, it's a very wide board that Panagiotis Papadopoulos has been able to put together here. And with the addition of a Phoenix there, he's got a way of dealing damage in the air in addition to sneaking around the edges of what's going on the other side of things. Already a copy of Experimental Frenzy in his graveyard. That one of the cards that really does give this red deck a little bit more punch in the late game.
Yeah, a dangerous card to face if you are on a Golgari mid-range deck. The way you win often is, well, actually we saw in the match, right? Reid Duke taking over eventually because Steve Hatto ran out of resources to continue playing the game. Now, with Experimental Frenzy, that is a problem. The resources don't stop coming, and barring a really big land glut on top, the Frenzy player tends to take over. So that's why Sahurek decided to Assassin's Trophy the Experimental Frenzy over one of these creatures.
These creatures are now all running in now. Some of them relatively large. I mean, the Wild Growth Walker is going to be able to pick something off, but there is still some damage being threatened here by Panagiotis Papadopoulos on the right-hand side of our screen.
Yeah, as you say, while the Walker can kill one creature, the Death Gorge Scavenger and the Jadelight Ranger, not as great to block. Neither would trade with the Runaway Steamkin, or the Goblin Chain Whirler. Those would be one-sided exchanges. So that leaves the Ashino Pyromancers. But that's not really an exchange you're excited about here. So here it'd be interesting to know what the last card in Petter's hand is. And Petter might be doing these blocks in consideration of a potential top deck, not just what's in hand. One option is this, to have both free 2 creatures blocking a Goblin Chain Whirler, hope for no interaction, and trade off that way a free 2 creature for a Goblin Chain Whirler, although that means more damage in the process.
Sahurek, a player who has had a fair amount of success both at the Grand Prix and Pro Tour level. very familiar with this sort of a standard format. Looks like that double block working at face value there. So Suhurek content to whittle down the board on both sides here, even if it does mean that he's taking a fairly sizable hit. Down to just 5 points of life now, and with a Rekindling Phoenix in play, he's going to need something big this turn if he's going to stay in this game. Already a game up, so if it goes to game 3, it's not the end of the world for him, but he would much rather close things out without having that happen.
Yeah, Petter here has a chance to at least gain time. Those 2 memorials to Folly can get back Merfolk Branchwalker, which synergizes with the Wildgrowth Walker in play. But that's not really doing anything. That's just buying time until you eventually perish the Rekindling Phoenix. So it's about really finding an answer to that Phoenix and taking over the game.
So a little bit more exploring going on here for Suhurek. If anything, the most important thing that achieves, getting those 3 additional points of life.
Yeah, Jadelight Ranger, perfect card to keep on top when it has kicker gain 6 and your creature gets larger. That's exactly what you want.
Papadopoulos just goes for the single safe attack here. 4 in the air from Rekindling Phoenix. And again, we see these red players unafraid to put additional cards into play, more lands into play, because they do have the potential for this explosive late game play of Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah, and here with 2 cast downs already in the graveyard, Suhurek deciding to go for the ultimate life gain play, taking the Wildgrowth Walker and preparing to gain a massive 12 life here.
Yeah, I mean, this is practically like saying, let's start the game all over again. Plays a Wildgrowth Walker, Jadelight Ranger. If there's not responses from Papadopoulos, immediately the Wildgrowth Walkers, they're going to get counters, and then there's all of the actual exploring itself happening. Duress, probably not good enough at this point. That land, well, that goes straight to hand.
Yeah. And the land is nice here. Suhurek having access to Carnage Tyrant in hand, so that lets him cast it, and there's also Memorial to Folly in play. So land is okay here, and the most important part that isn't seen is Petter is digging deeper into the deck to the cards that he needs, specifically something like Vraska's Contempt to deal with this Phoenix.
I mean, 16 life all of a sudden. These Wildgrowth Walkers being absolutely spectacular for Suhurek in a way that we haven't really seen Reid Duke able to achieve there, as Duke and Hatto draw opening hands for their deciding game.
Yeah, and here's Suhurek turning a corner to the extent where actually attacking with Rekindling Phoenix is starting to make less sense. Now with the 2 Wildgrowth Walkers, one gigantic one and a free 5, Suhurek can put on a lot of pressure. So Papadopoulos decides, you know what, this Phoenix is going to stay back home, relax, and try to block. But with that Memorial to Folly, a single untapped land means that Wildgrowth Walker being blocked by Rekindling Phoenix, well, then you can just get back to Death Gorge Scavenger and the Phoenix is gone.
Yeah, this is a big moment here. Big attacks coming here from Suhurek. We'll jump back to our main table shortly, but I just kind of want to see whether or not Suhurek's going to be able to decisively do something with this board position he's been able to put together off the back of these Wildgrowth Walkers.
Yeah, this is getting to... I like how Suhurek sideboard plan works here. The Wildgrowth Walker's allowed to turn that 4 life back into 16, turn defense into offense, and trying to take over the game. In a way, that's going to be really hard for Papadopoulos to do anything about. Fight with Fire with 9 mana is roughly it, but with Petter at 16, it won't be lethal. So if there aren't enough if Papadopoulos has to block here to develop the board, that might be enough. Yeah, because Fight with Fire with Kicker is 10, plus the Phoenix is 4, down to 2, but that's not lethal, and then Suhurek can swing back.
I mean, I've heard Wildgrowth Walker referred to for this standard format as kind of being the new Tarmogoyf. It's a 2-mana creature that is frequently very large indeed, and here we see Petter Suhurek really able to lean on the power of this uncommon creature, which previously we'd not really seen do a whole lot of work in standard, in spite of the fact that it's been an option for a while.
Yeah, and that took a slight format change, right? Like a lot of cards rotating out. But what I love here, if you want to look at game plan differences, one player is playing a 1/3 that gains free life, per activation, and the other one is playing a 2/1 that deals 2 damage. Clearly, one of these players has taken over as a result.
And a Carnage Tyrant, the follow-up here. Panayotis Papadopoulos, his life total now at 6, and just has to extend the hand there. Petasarek picking up the win, and that means that we're going to get a chance to head back and get back to our main match, where maybe now we've got a little bit of additional perspective as to how this Game 3 could go, because the matchup, while the players are different, kind of similar. We've got Reid Duke on the left of our screen, Steve Hatto on the right. It's green-black versus mono-red. Let's get our deciding game kicked off here. We've got mulligans to 6 on both sides of things here. I'm not quite sure who that favors. A lot of it comes down to the very details as to how many lands these guys have decided they can get away with. Occasionally, these green-black lists can, with their Explore, find themselves a little light on lands.
That's true, and we definitely see Reid miss some land drops, but with Merfolk, Branchwalker, and Jadelight Ranger, normally not a problem. Doesn't seem like Reid will have mana issues, at least in terms of quantity. The issue for Steve here is Steve's list is very greedy land-wise, so a bunch of 4-drops in hand here. Rekindling Phoenix twice, Experimental Frenzy. Steve is really looking for mountains here.
So this Jadelight Ranger,
Resolve the first trigger, please.
Steve
Triggers is
allowing...
It is only one trigger.
So yeah, they're discussing here, but there is essentially one trigger here. So Steve has to respond to this Jadelight Ranger trigger. Otherwise, the Jadelight Ranger being a 4/3 would have meant that the shock wasn't effective here. While it does say explore then explore, it's all part of one action, which is why you see it this way.
And Reid deciding whether or not Ravenous Chupacabra is going to be a good fit for his game plan in this deciding game. He's got a lot of lands in hand, so leaving it on top I think makes sense.
Yeah, I think here Reid was pretty sure that Chupacabra was going to stay on top, but decided to give it a little more thought to make it unclear to Steve Hatto whether that was desirable or not.
Runaway Steamkin coming down, in principle a way of Steve generating a little bit of mana, but clearly Reid was not going to let that happen. Ravenous Chupacabra finds a tasty morsel in that Steamkin.
That was a point exchange by Reid. By taking the time to think about the Chupacabra, it made Steve Hatto think whether Reid might have that second Black Source or not, and then put the Runaway Steamkin. Granted, there weren't many actions, so Steve decided to run it anyways. But here, that little hesitation from Reid might have incited Steve into playing the card rather than keeping, say, a Lightning Strike up.
So Find Finality, the card that's revealed here off Jadelight Ranger. And again, Reid Duke taking a little bit of time to decide whether or not he wants to keep that one. He does leave it on top. I mean, both sides of Find Finality, very potent in a lot of matchups. One of the reasons that this card is so good, firstly, it's just a huge amount of flexibility.
Yeah, the different, like, it's basically Soul Salvage plus a Wrath effect. Like it's been one of the star cards from this Golgari deck, more so than Assassin's Trophy. And here, Reid again hesitating on the Find Finality, but it's a great card here. Being able to get back Jadelight Ranger and Ravenous Chupacabra, that sounds wonderful to me. And Reid may even decide to get back both Jadelights, depending on the comfort level. With Steve not drawing lands for so long, and Reid is starting to be ahead. I think here a Find Finality for Jadelight Ranger and Ravenous Chupacabra, in my view, just to have an answer to a creature that comes down, plus that Vraska's Relic Seeker with a high chance of being next turn and now 100% confirmed with that Swamp. Basically, Reid's going to easily take over this game and the match.
Well, I mean, what we have here is a mid-range deck that's hit the mid-game against an aggro deck that's not really got past the early game, which is a difficult situation to be in, especially when he's not really able to cast most of the spells in his deck just yet. Just 2 lands in play and some relatively expensive threats here as Treasure Map comes down for Hatto.
Unfortunately, Vraska Relic Seeker is a big fan of treasures.
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one for Steve Hatto to get out of. He got the first game relatively easily, but Reid Duke in these post-sideboard games has shown that he's got some stern response to that sort of a plan.
Check for 2. 18. Yes.
I think here making a Pirate first makes sense. So you want Vraska to be out of range of a Lightning Strike or a Wizard's Lightning. You can take care of that Treasure Map a little down the line once it starts being a problem.
Hatto really needs to find a mountain here, and he does. Gets that unstable mountain into play. The third one, pretty important given that he's really been stranded on what he can do for these turns for a while now.
Yeah, and with Hatto's hand having 2 Rekindling Phoenix and Frenzy, really needs a 4th land. Legion Warboss, a very good free drop on turn 3. On turn 6, with a Planeswalker and a bunch of value creatures, not quite the same.
Yeah, ultimately chooses to pass things back. This way there's mana up for activating that treasure map if he so chooses. Reid just has the earth on everything on it in terms of what he wants to do. His explorers have found him land, and he already had plenty of spells to work with.
14.
Yeah, Reid just able to get a whole bunch of attacks in here while getting still more pirates in play. And Vraska at 10 loyalty can potentially end this game this very next turn. And even if that wasn't sure, well, you know, maybe we should have a Doom Whisper as well, just to close things out.
Yeah, and closing things out indeed. Vraska Relic Seeker, 10 loyalty, a bunch of power in play. With Steve Hatto missing out on that land drop, that land, too little, too late, unfortunately. A Rekindling Phoenix is not going to be enough to deal with this Vraska Relic Seeker putting Steve Hatto down to 1, and these Menace Pirates coming in for lethal damage.
Yeah, it turns out that when you've got Reid Duke plus a Planeswalker versus most things, you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's usually the position that Reid likes to be in. In Eternal formats, that's more like Liliana the Last Hope, but here, Vraska Relic Seeker putting Steve to 1, and then the Pirates finishing the job.
There's the handshake. Reid Duke advancing to 4-1 here in round 5 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Good job by him. And you can see that there's a couple of other matches still going on in our feature match area. We're going to get a chance to jump across and see a little bit of magic from the table on the right-hand side of our table. A couple of Hall of Famers there. We have Ben Stark and Yuya Watanabe. We've got a chance to see both of them in our feature match area to some extent during the limited portion. But these days, you cannot get away with just being good at Limited if you're looking to win a Pro Tour. Each of these players now battling with 60-card decks, and we'll get a chance to see what it is they're working with. Watanabe from Team Musashi, and then we have Channel Fireball being the team represented by Ben Stark there. He's very much focused on Limited. That's where he gets most of his jollies. He enjoys playing 40-card decks a lot. But you know what? No slouching constructed. We saw him make the finals of the Team Pro Tour, which was all constructed, no Limited to be seen there. There he was playing Crown Ironworks, and here we see him on green-white aggro.
Yeah, really here, and we really mean here aggro rather than tokens. Not really a Marshal of the Multitudes. It's really that kind of white we need aggressive plan, but instead of heroic reinforcements, Flower Flourish is the finisher of choice.
Healer's Hawk coming down here on turn 1. That a play that some people prefer in Limited, though Ben Stark went a different way in that direction. Watanabe on the other side of things, he is on Is It Drakes, a deck that can have a surprising amount of reach when you want it to, though it's going to have to deal more than just the 20 points of damage given these Healer's Hawks, gaining a bit of life for Ben Stark.
Yeah, and Watanabe's list not this well tuned really to try to fight the white matchups. A card that is really important in a matchup like this is something like Fiery Cannonade, and Yuya not having, it seems, access to that card. It's going to be a difficult ride here. Really what Yuya wants in that case is to try to fight the board with a number of Drakes, have them survive, and then take over and deal lethal damage. So really turning into this kind of blue-red mid-range deck.
Here comes a... Well, it's a card that Ben Stark had a lot of in his draft deck. Goblin Electromancer coming down there. It would, in principle, mean that spells are going to be cheaper for Watanabe, but a Baffling End quickly dealing with that one. These are post-sideboarded games. We're in game 3 here, so it means that each of these players will have had an opportunity to tune. And Watanabe, he's missing land drops, but he's making Electromancers. If he can keep them around, it means he gets to cast some very cheap spells, kind of like hitting a land drop. But if he can't, well, he's going to be in all sorts of bother.
Yeah, and Ben Stark with a really interesting piece of technology in hand that might be a problem for Watanabe, that Crawl Harpooner. Watanabe, without the lands, is going to have trouble even getting a Drake onto the table, but the Harpooner might be an answer to the Drake down the line.
Yeah, it's a 2-mana 3/2 with reach. Obviously, you need to get up to 4 power if it's going to fight something with 4 toughness and kill it, but that only means 1 creature in the graveyard, and there are plenty of creatures in Ben Stark's list. Sooner or later, some of them will find themselves in the Grumper and able to power up that Undergrowth ability.
Yeah. However, this Goblin Electromancer, it's going to town. Like, it's essentially, oh, I love this. Entrancing Melody, a Healer's Hawk for 1 with that discount for Electromancer, and try to fight back the board. I think with that draw of the Electromancer surviving the land plus the charge, Yuya is taking back control of this game.
Yeah, I mean, for Ben Stark, it certainly hasn't been the dream draw for him. While there are plenty of us that love casting Healer's Hawks, it's not all Healer's Hawks all the time for this green-white list, believe it or not.
Yeah, and one of Ben Stark's most powerful cards in this situation to try to continue the pressure is going to be that Shalai Voice of Plenty, but Yuya has access to Lava Coil, 1 red mana with the Electromancer to deal with Shalai. I think at this point, Yuya is taking over the game. The Harpooner can take care of the first Drake, but Ben Stark is losing resources quickly, so Yuya has really turned this game around with that Entrancing Melody and this tempo play of Goblin Electromancer, looking so great with Radical Idea.
And one of the things that I really like about this Is It Drakes list is that if you do have a key sideboard card, it's that much easier to draw it because this is a list that runs a colossal amount of card drawing. It ends up being very consistent. It can find what it needs with relative ease due to so many ways of manipulating its deck. And that means that when you need that Lava Coil, you'll find it. If you've got it in your deck, you can work towards beating just about anything. And so a little bit more onus on good deck design, but if you've designed with the right matchups in mind, then yes, you can do a huge amount of work.
Yeah, and a second Baffling End getting rid of Electromancer. A really key play by Ben Stark here before Watanabe can take over the game. But yeah, Enigma Drake here, most likely going to just die to the Crawl Harpooner. But Ben has no pressure. That's the problem. It's not that Ben is lacking answers. It's that Ben is lacking pressure. Healer's Hawk is not really going to deal an extra 11 points of damage.
Yeah, the one saving grace for Ben Stark right now is that there's not the natural 4th land available for Yuya Watanabe, so he can start slamming Crackling Drakes. He's had to use Charter Course here to dig and find the 4th land. Finally gets there now, and this is going to be the point where, from this turn onwards, Watanabe is just deploying threats that can deal with a 25-point life total comparatively easily here.
Yeah. And you can see Watanabe manipulating dice on the top just to keep track of the number of instants and sorceries so that when a Drake does come, Watanabe knows the power. And 25 life is going to look like very little against a 10-plus power creature.
Yeah, Sky March Aspirant, no City's Blessing to work with just yet. Don't forget those Baffling Ends in play will count towards the City's Blessing. I mean, it's a good creature on turn 1, but it looks a little foolish in comparison to this Crackling Drake that comes along. It draws a card, and it is a 10-4 flyer.
Yeah, just a humongous creature. And this is a Johnny with Crawl Harpooner. I love this interaction. This is great deck building.
Yeah, -2 loyalty on a Ajani to return a creature from the given a mana cost of 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That is Crawl Harpooner, and it's a way of dealing with a lot of Drakes for just 1 card. Though, shock finishing off the Planeswalker, and there's another Drake from Watanabe. Each and every turn here, forcing Ben Stark to find an answer.
Yeah, just you can see the power of this Drake deck. Essentially, one goes down, another gets drawn. And even without Arclight Phoenix, Watanabe offering a lot of damage. But here, this history of Benalia is going to force Yuya's hand to be more aggressive or deal with the board. A lot of these shocks have gotten used up, so it's going to get harder for Yuya to control the board. Yuya's, with the Beacon Bolt in hand, can deal with parts of the board, so I still think Yuya's ahead, especially because I believe that this Drake will be lethal in 2 attacks. We're already at 11 power, and that's only going up. So once we get to 12, 13, and with Entrancing Melody, this is going to get easier. I think Yuya's going to maybe take this one down next turn if Ben doesn't find an answer.
I really like the addition of Entrancing Melody to this list. It's not something that we necessarily have seen in previous events, but it's something that a number of teams seem to have brought to the table for this weekend, and it does just give you a very easy route to getting a 2-for-1.
Yeah, especially in these Goblin Electromancer lists. I've seen it without Goblin Electromancer, which you could debate on the is it Drake list whether you want the card or not. That's a point. But once you do play Electromancer, you unlock Entrancing Melody, and that's where it gets really powerful. When your opponent goes Wild Growth Walker on turn 2, you can go Entrancing Melody with that Electromancer on turn 3, get rid of the Walker as an option. It does many more things, but that is one of the important parts of the puzzle.
Stark here just left kind of surveying what's going on from the other side of the table. Yuya Watanabe, his life total not especially high, but the life total of Ben Stark, as much as it might look good right now, is going to go down fast. Beacon Bolt takes down another blocker for Ben Stark, and these attacks are going to be absolutely gigantic.
14 damage. That's the power of the Drake deck. You just play a game, and then at some point when you attack, you kill your opponent in 1 or 2 swings.
And it's unfortunate for Ben Stark, he never quite got to the point of having City's Blessing. He got close on permanence, but not enough that Sky March Aspirant is even able to block here. So this damage is just going to have to go through. And Ben Stark now, he's just kind of in a position where the cards that Yuya Watanabe is deploying at this stage in the game just seem much, much more powerful.
Yeah, and we have access to those charter courses in Yuya's hand. Even more card advantage on top of this board presence pressure. This is going to be really hard for Ben.
Yeah, I mean, the Is It Drake's deck, it's one of these decks that it can afford to run lots of kind of hollow card drawing. Like, the card drawing just begets more card drawing, but the advantage that it gives you is consistency. It lets you find key sideboard cards, and then all of these spells that kind of have just cycled through your deck count as extra power for your Beacon Bolts, and of course, for these Drakes.
Yeah, and Charter Course, one of the premier draw spells in the deck. By far the best draw 2 available. It's just really good. Like, the fact that it's a hybrid discard Arclight Phoenix and sift through your deck, plus potentially even just card advantage if you do it post-combat. That play is available. Oh, Murmuring Mystic is a really funny draw there for Yuya. Essentially, Murmuring Mystics make sure that no card that Ben can play at this point is really going to go over the top, since Yuya's going to get a bunch of 1/1s as extra value.
Yeah. Beacon Bolt from the graveyard doing a huge amount there, getting the handshake from Ben Stark. Watanabe advancing to 4-1 here in round 5 of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. Fantastic performance from the Japanese Hall of Famer. And you can see that at that point, our feature match area, it is bare, because that means that's the last of our matches from the feature match area. Lovely performance there. We got a chance to see a couple of different takes on how Green-Black fights against the red decks. Ultimately, looking fairly good for the Golgari Menace when it comes to at least the aggression of red, but then, oh boy, I do like me an Is It Drake deck. I know, obviously, you've had your successes with it already, Eduardo, but yeah, these players that are getting to draw so many extra cards and then turn that card drawing it into additional damage in the form of these Drakes, they seem to be having a whale of a time, and hopefully you guys are having a whale of a time too, watching our coverage here of the Pro Tour. We will have more Standard for you, 3 more rounds of Standard happening the rest of the day, but for now, it's across to the news desk.